Why did the Philippines hand over its former president to the International Criminal Court? Rodrigo Duterte, who ruled the country for 6 years between 2016 and 2022, is now behind bars. On the 11th of March 2025, he was arrested and extradited to The Hague to face charges of crimes against humanity. But why exactly is he on trial? And why, after years of protecting him, did the country's current president choose to give him up? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. Historically, serving and former political leaders tended to be immune from prosecution, even for the most serious crimes committed while in office. However, all this began to change in the late 20th century. Following the creation of tribunals for Rwanda, Sierra Leone and Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Court was set up to try the most serious human rights abuses, such as genocide and crimes against humanity. But while the ICC was seen as proof that once untouchable leaders could now face justice, enforcement remains uneven. All sorts of factors can be at play, not least of all domestic political considerations. A good example is Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines. Although he'd been under investigation for many years for overseeing a policy of state-sanctioned killing, he long enjoyed official protection from his successor. However, in March 2025, he was handed over to the court to face charges of crimes against humanity. The Republic of the Philippines is located in Southeast Asia. At around 300,000 square kilometres or around 120,000 square miles, it comprises over 7,000 islands. The largest is Luzon, the home of the capital city, Manila. The population is around 115 million. While the country is ethnically diverse, with over 130 different groups, the vast majority are Catholic Christians. Around 6% are Muslim. The Philippines has a long and rich history. Having been settled around 30,000 years ago, it was conquered by the Kingdom of Spain in the 16th century before being seized by the United States during the 1898 Spanish-American War. This US rule lasted until the 4th of July 1946, when the Philippines finally achieved independence. With a constitutional system closely modelled on the United States, the country initially followed a democratic path. However, all this ended in 1972. Facing a growing number of crises, including popular demonstrations and several insurgencies, the country's president, Ferdinand imposed martial law. This marked the start of a corrupt and brutal dictatorship that lasted until 1986, when Marcos was overthrown. Over the following decades, steps were taken to consolidate democracy. This included a constitutional amendment limiting the president to a single 6-year term of office. However, underneath this political change, the country faced many deep-rooted social and economic problems. In addition to rampant corruption and crumbling infrastructure, the Philippines was beset by high levels of poverty and extreme income inequality. To add to all this, the government came under heavy criticism for failing to tackle the rapidly increasing crime levels, especially the country's growing drug problem. Having first emerged in the 1970s, when low-cost and easy-to-manufacture methamphetamine began to be spread across the country, by the turn of the millennium, the situation had become increasingly severe. Fueled by poor economic conditions, demand had grown dramatically in poverty-stricken urban and rural communities, in turn feeding the growth of vicious drug gangs and crime more generally. And it was against this backdrop of general frustration at the economic and political situation, as well as the growing anger about the rising drug problem, that Rodrigo Duterte emerged as a leading candidate in the 2016 presidential election. As mayor of Davao City, the country's third most populous city, he built a reputation for being tough on crime. Combining strict policies and heavy-handed law enforcement, he took a zero-tolerance approach to drugs and criminal activity. As well as strengthening the city's police force, he imposed curfews for children and adolescents, banned public smoking, and imposed heavy alcohol restrictions. However, most controversially, he publicly supported a vigilante group that was accused of killing hundreds of suspected drug dealers and petty criminals, as Davao developed a reputation for being one of the safest cities in the Philippines. Duterte promised a nationwide campaign to eliminate drug dealers and clamp down on criminals, a pledge that eventually saw him win the 2016 election. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do consider giving it a like and perhaps subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. After taking office, Duterte quickly implemented his promises. At first, this seemed pretty innocuous. For example, a high-profile campaign saw police visit the homes of suspected drug dealers and users and urge them to surrender. However, reports soon emerged of widespread and systematic extrajudicial killings, in addition to deaths at the hands of the police, who usually defended their actions by claiming that suspects had been resisting arrest. Killings were also attributed to death squads operating within the country's poorest areas. While the exact death toll is contested, the number of people killed is widely believed to be anywhere between 6,000 and 30,000. But while the campaign enjoyed considerable support in the Philippines, where many saw it as relief against the devastating impact of crime and drug use, it was heavily criticised internationally. In addition to being condemned by the United Nations, many governments also spoke out against what seemed to be an official policy of state-sanctioned murder, with the suggestion that this could even lead to a case before the International Criminal Court. The Philippines withdrew from the ICC in 2019. But despite this, Duterte was unfazed and unrepentant. Defending the police and dismissing criticisms of his human rights record, he insisted that his policies had seen a dramatic reduction in crime rates and drug use. But by now, criticism was also growing at home. While many supported the crackdown on criminals, opponents argued that the policy had merely targeted the weakest and most vulnerable members of society and had in fact left the drug organisations largely intact. All this came to the forefront of international attention in 2021 when Maria Ressa won the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to investigate the government's extrajudicial killings, as well as its broader efforts to undermine democracy. As human rights bodies around the world called for more to be done, arguing that the national courts in the Philippines were unwilling and unable to investigate the killings, the ICC opened an investigation into Duterte's war on drugs in May 2021. But while this intensified after Duterte left office in 2022, the former president enjoyed official protection. Before leaving office, Duterte had formed a powerful political alliance with his eventual successor, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., the son of the former dictator. This was cemented in 2022 when Duterte's daughter, Sara, ran as Marcos's vice presidential running mate in the presidential election, thus uniting the two influential families and helping Marcos to win a landslide victory. As a result, Marcos now protected Duterte. Firstly, he argued that the ICC no longer had jurisdiction to investigate the case, a position the court rejected on the grounds that the alleged crimes were committed when the Philippines was still part of the court. Second, he argued that the country's justice system could investigate, even though critics argued that previous inquiries had led nowhere. But as well as presidential protection, Duterte also enjoyed security from an extensive network of allies across the government, media, police and the judiciary. While in some cases this was due to genuine support for the former president, others appeared worried about potential reprisals from Duterte's supporters or even feared being implicated if the former president was arrested and charged. As a result, international pressure to arrest Duterte was vehemently opposed, often accompanied by extreme nationalist rhetoric that presented the campaign as an infringement of Filipino sovereignty. All this meant that despite mounting evidence of criminal activity and growing international pressure to hand him over, Duterte managed to avoid arrest and prosecution. Until now. So, what exactly happened. Ultimately, it came down to an unraveling of the political alliance between Duterte and Marcos. While the strategic partnership had initially appeared strong, bringing together two powerful political families, tensions soon emerged. This came to the fore in June 2024 when Sara Duterte resigned as Secretary of Education, signalling her unhappiness with the president. Over the following months, tension steadily grew, with the Vice President claiming that she'd never been friends with Marcos, but merely his running mate, and that he didn't know how to be president. But the critical moment came in November 2024, insisting that she was facing growing threats to her safety from the president and his supporters. She publicly told a press conference that she'd hired a hitman to kill the president and his wife if anything were to happen to her. But while she later claimed that the comments were merely a joke, the Parliament didn't see it as much. With mounting allegations of corruption against her, the House of Representatives formally voted to impeach her on the 5th of February, sending the matter to the Senate for trial. And it's against this backdrop that Rodrigo Duterte was arrested. The first step came on the 7th of March when the ICC issued a secret arrest warrant for Duterte. Charging him with crimes against humanity, the allegations included claims of murder, torture and rape that were committed between November 2011 and March 2019. This, in turn, paved the way for the Philippine government to act. 4 days later, as Duterte returned from a trip to Hong Kong, he was detained at Manila Airport. From there, he was then transferred to The Hague, where he appeared before the court for an initial hearing on the 14th of March. As for next steps, the judges set the 23rd of September for a further hearing to confirm the charges. If this finds that there are substantial reasons to believe that the alleged crimes were in fact committed, the case will then proceed to trial. And if this happens, Duterte will become the first former Asian leader to stand trial at the ICC. In the meantime, Duterte's arrest and extradition have deeply polarised Philippine society. While many have warmly welcomed the news, seeing it as a vital step forward for justice, Duterte's supporters have been outraged by the news, seeing it as an affront to national sovereignty and a betrayal by the government. This has in turn seen mass protests in his home city of Davao, as well as the capital, Manila. In addition, there's also been considerable anger online, with many questioning the legitimacy of the charges and openly intimidating victims and their families, as well as human rights activists who pushed for Duterte's arrest. As for President Marcos, he's attempted to distance himself from the case. Steering clear of claims that the arrest was an act of political revenge, he's insisted that Duterte's arrest was in fact merely a case of the Philippines meeting its international obligations, particularly to Interpol, which circulated the arrest warrant. But of course, few will see it this way. Despite this effort to present the extradition as merely a procedural decision, most will in fact see it as nothing less than an act of revenge against his predecessor. But regardless of the motives, to many outsiders, the decision to arrest and extradite Duterte will be seen as an essential step towards strengthening international justice. I hope you found that helpful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.